The ceremony hall fell silent as the young woman's scream cut through the air, not of pain, but of something dying inside her. Rowena watched from the crowd as another girl's eyes went blank, her will dissolving under the mating bond like sugar in boiling water. The king's beta stood over his new mate with satisfaction while she swayed, no longer herself. Rowena's hands clenched until her nails drew blood. Not me, never me. But in a kingdom where refusal meant death and the bond meant erasure, what choice did any of them have? Stay until the end to see how one girl's defiance shattered an entire kingdom. Like and comment what city you're watching from. The fortress of Blackstone Keep didn't just house a kingdom, it imprisoned one. Rowena had lived within its walls for 22 years, and in that time she'd learned 3 truths that nobody spoke aloud. Women who were claimed by the mating bond stopped being themselves. The men who claimed them called it destiny, and anyone who questioned it disappeared. She stood now in the servants' quarter, scrubbing blood from stone floors that had seen too much of it. The ceremony hall above her head was preparing for another bonding ritual, and she could hear the musicians tuning their instruments, the cheerful notes a mockery of what was about to happen. "You're doing it wrong," said Mari, one of the older kitchen women, her voice flat and emotionless. She'd been bonded 15 years ago to one of the king's guards. "You need to scrub in circles, not lines." Rowena looked up at her. Mari's eyes were distant, unfocused, as they always were. The woman who'd once smuggled extra bread to hungry children, who'd laughed too loud and sang off-key while she worked, that woman was gone. What remained was a shell that cooked and cleaned and spread her legs on command. "Like this?" Rowena asked, making the circular motion even though it made no difference to the stain. "Yes." "Good girl." Mari smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Nothing reached her eyes anymore. Rowena's stomach turned. She went back to scrubbing, her mind anywhere but here. The mating bond was supposed to be sacred, divine, even. When an alpha's power recognized its match, the bond would snap into place, linking 2 souls forever. The stories said it was beautiful, a completion, a joining, a love that transcended everything. The reality was that Rowena had never seen a bonded woman smile with her whole face ever again. She'd seen them obey, she'd seen them serve, she'd seen them turn into perfect, pliant creatures who existed only to please their alphas. And she'd seen what happened to the ones who tried to fight it, the screaming, the breaking, the inevitable surrender as the bond crushed their will into dust. "Rowena!" The sharp voice of Mistress Oleander cracked through the kitchen. "Get yourself cleaned up. You're serving at tonight's ceremony." Every muscle in Rowena's body went rigid. I'm not trained for... You have 2 hands and can carry a tray. That's all the training you need." Oleander's hawk-like eyes narrowed. "Unless you're refusing an order?" Rowena's throat went dry. Refusal meant punishment. Punishment meant the stocks, or the whip, or worse, being offered to one of the unmated alphas as a gift to claim however they wished. "No, mistress. I'll be ready." "Good. Wear the blue dress. Make yourself presentable." Oleander's lip curled. "Try not to look so sullen. The court doesn't need to see your face like you're attending a funeral." "But I am," Rowena thought as the woman swept away. "Someone's going to die up there tonight. They just won't bury the body." The ceremony hall gleamed with candlelight and cruelty. Rowena stood against the wall with the other servants, her tray of wine glasses clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The nobles filled the room in their finest clothes, silks and velvets in deep jewel tones, gold thread catching the light. They laughed and drank and congratulated each other as if this were truly a celebration. At the center of it all sat King Aldrich on his throne. He was younger than she'd expected for a man with so much blood on his hands, perhaps 30, with dark hair and darker eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His presence filled the room like smoke, heavy and inescapable. Even from across the hall, Rowena could feel the weight of his power, the alpha dominance that made grown men lower their eyes and women's knees go weak. She'd never been this close to him before. Servants like her were kept far from the king's sight, useful only when needed, invisible the rest of the time. "Beautiful ceremony, isn't it?" whispered Lena, another serving girl, her eyes bright with foolish romance. "I heard the alpha tonight is Lord Castor's son. The girl's so lucky." Rowena followed her gaze to where a young man stood near the dais, his chest puffed with pride. He was handsome in the way of men who'd never known hardship, soft hands, easy smile, the confidence of someone who'd always gotten what he wanted. The girl beside him was trying very hard not to cry. She couldn't have been more than 19. Her name was Alara, Rowena remembered, a merchant's daughter from the lower city who'd been honored with an invitation to court 3 months ago. They'd dressed her in white lace, put flowers in her dark hair, painted her lips red. She looked like a bride. She looked terrified. "The bond will be good for her," Lena continued, oblivious. "She'll never want for anything. Lord Castor's family is very wealthy." "She'll never want for anything," Rowena echoed quietly, "because she won't want anything at all." Lena frowned. "That's a terrible thing to say. The bond is a gift. It's love." Rowena didn't answer. There was no point. The music swelled and the crowd fell silent. King Aldrich rose from his throne, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. "We gather tonight to witness the sacred bond, the joining of two souls destined for each other." His words were formal, rehearsed, empty. "Lord Brennan Castor, step forward with your chosen mate." Brennan practically dragged Alara to the center of the room. Her hand shook in his, and Rowena saw her lips moving. A prayer, maybe, or a goodbye to whoever she used to be. "Do you accept this bond?" Aldrich asked, the question directed at Brennan. "I do, Your Majesty, with everything I am." Brennan's smile was triumphant. "Then claim what is yours." It happened fast. Brennan's hand shot out, gripping Alara's wrist. His eyes flashed with alpha power, gold bleeding through the brown, and the air itself seemed to shudder. The bond snapped into place with an almost audible crack, and Alara gasped, her body going rigid. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd held its breath. Then Alara began to scream. It wasn't pain, not physical pain. It was the sound of someone being hollowed out, scraped clean from the inside. Her free hand clawed at her chest as if she could tear the bond out. Her face contorted in horror and desperation. "No, no, please, I can't." "Shh, it's all right," Brennan cooed, pulling her closer. "Don't fight it. It's easier if you don't fight." But Alara fought. She thrashed and twisted, trying to pull away, her screams turning to sobs. The nobles watched with mild interest, as if this were all part of the entertainment. Some even smiled. Rowena's tray trembled in her hands. The bond was a living thing now, visible as golden threads wrapping around Alara's body, sinking into her skin. Every place they touched, her resistance weakened. Her movement slowed. Her eyes began to lose focus. "Please," Alara whispered, the word barely audible. "Please, I don't want—" The bond tightened, and something inside her shattered. Rowena saw it happen. The exact moment Alara stopped being Alara. Her body went limp, held up only by Brennan's grip. The terror drained from her face, replaced by nothing. Blankness. Emptiness. When she looked up at Brennan, her eyes were adoring. "My Alpha," she breathed, and the word sounded wrong, like someone else was speaking through her mouth. The crowd erupted in applause. Brennan kissed her, possessive and claiming, and Alara melted into him like she'd been made for nothing else. The girl who'd been crying and fighting 30 seconds ago was gone. In her place stood a perfectly obedient mate. Rowena's tray slipped from her hands. The crash of glass shattering on marble was deafening in the moment of silence that followed. Every eye in the room turned to her. "You clumsy fool!" Mistress Oleander descended on her like a fury, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. "Clean this up immediately." "I'm sorry, Rowena dropped to her knees, her hands shaking so badly she could barely pick up the broken pieces. Blood welled from a cut on her palm, red drops falling onto white shards. She could feel them all staring, judging. The king's gaze was the heaviest of all, a physical weight that made her skin crawl. "Get her out of here," someone muttered, "ruining the ceremony." "Foolish girl can't even hold a tray steady." Rowena gathered the glass, her vision blurring. She didn't know if it was tears or rage, maybe both. A hand appeared in front of her face, Lena, helping her collect the pieces. "Hurry," she whispered, "before Oleander gets worse." But Rowena couldn't move. She was staring at Alara, who now stood peacefully in Brennan's arms, smiling at him like he'd hung the moon. The same girl who'd been screaming in terror moments ago. That could be me, Rowena thought, ice flooding her veins. That will be me. Every woman in this room would eventually be chosen, eventually be claimed, eventually be broken. It was only a matter of time. Rowena, come on! Lena tugged her arm. She stood on shaking legs, cradling the broken glass in her apron, and fled from the hall. Behind her, the celebration continued as if nothing had happened, as if a girl hadn't just died standing up. Rowena didn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling and listening to the other women breathe. Most of them were bonded. They slept peacefully, their minds no longer troubled by anything as inconvenient as free will. I have to leave, she thought for the 1000th time. I have to find a way out. But there was no out. Blackstone Keep was a fortress, built into the mountainside with sheer cliffs on 3 sides and a heavily guarded gate on the 4th. Even if she somehow made it past the walls, where would she go? The kingdom stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction, and every settlement answered to King Aldrich. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The bond would find her eventually. A sound broke through her spiraling thoughts, quiet crying from the bed next to hers. She turned her head to see Mari curled on her side, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Rowena sat up. Mari? The older woman didn't respond, but she didn't pull away when Rowena touched her shoulder. Are you all right? I had a daughter. Mari's voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse. I had a daughter, and I can't remember her name. Rowena went cold. The bond, it takes the memories, the ones that hurt, the ones that make you want to be someone else. Mari's eyes were streaming now, but her face remained eerily calm, as if her body didn't quite remember how to express emotion anymore. I know I loved her. I know she died, but I can't see her face. I can't hear her voice. It's all gone. Mari, you screamed tonight because you're smart enough to be afraid. Mari finally looked at her, and for just a moment something flickered in those dead eyes, a ghost of the woman she'd been. But being afraid won't save you. Nothing will. When they choose you, you'll break just like the rest of us. And the worst part is, you won't even care. She rolled over, turning her back to Rowena. Get some sleep. Morning comes early. Rowena lay back down, her heart hammering against her ribs. No, she thought fiercely. No, I won't. I won't become that. I'll die first. But even as she thought it, she knew it was a lie. Because they wouldn't let her die. They'd bond her, break her, and she'd spend the rest of her life as a smiling, empty shell, unless she did something, anything. The idea came to her in the darkest hours before dawn, terrible and desperate and completely insane. What if she ran? Not from the fortress, that was impossible. But what if she ran from the bond itself? What if, when her moment came, she simply refused? Not with words. Words wouldn't matter. But with action. With defiance so absolute that the bond had nothing to latch onto. It wouldn't work. It couldn't work. The bond was stronger than any individual will, stronger than any desire for freedom. But the alternative was becoming Mari, was becoming Alara, was becoming nothing. Rowena closed her eyes and made her choice. If they tried to bond her, she would run. She would fight. She would do whatever it took to stay herself, even if it killed her, especially if it killed her, because a death on her own terms was better than a life without them. 3 days later, Mistress Oleander summoned her again. You're to attend the king's choosing, she said, her tone clipped. All unbonded women of age are required to be present. The king's choosing. It happened twice a year, a grand ceremony where the unmated alphas of the court selected women to bond with. It was presented as an honor, a chance to rise in status. It was a hunting ground. When? Rowena asked, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. Tonight. Wear your best dress. Do something with your hair. Try to look less like a kitchen rat. Tonight. Rowena nodded mechanically and returned to her work, but her mind was racing. Tonight. They would parade her in front of the alphas like livestock, and one of them would choose her, and that would be the end. Unless she ran. The plan formed piece by piece throughout the day. She would wait until the ceremony started, until everyone was distracted by the spectacle. Then she would slip away. Not toward the main gate, but toward the old eastern tower. It had been damaged in a storm years ago and was supposedly off limits, but she'd explored it once as a child. There were broken windows high up, overlooking the cliff face. If she could reach them, if she could climb down, it was suicide. The cliff was hundreds of feet of sheer rock. She'd fall and die. broken on the stones below. But at least she'd die as herself. She spent the afternoon in a haze, going through the motions of her work while her thoughts spiraled. Mari watched her with knowing eyes, but said nothing. Lena chattered excitedly about the ceremony, about which alphas might be looking for mates, about how romantic it all was. Rowena wanted to scream at her, wanted to shake her and make her see what was really happening, but Lena was already lost. She'd been raised on fairy tales about the bond, about true love and destiny. She'd go willingly to her own breaking and call it happiness. As evening approached, Rowena changed into her best dress, a simple green thing that had belonged to her mother. She brushed her dark hair until it shone, pinned it back from her face. In the cracked mirror, she looked almost pretty. She looked like prey. "You clean up well?" Oleander said when she presented herself. "Try to smile tonight. The alphas like women who look pleased to be chosen." "Yes, mistress. And for heaven's sake, don't drop anything this time." Rowena bit her tongue and followed the other women toward the great hall. The great hall had been transformed into something out of a nightmare. Silk banners hung from the rafters in deep crimson and gold, candles blazed in elaborate chandeliers, and the nobles had dressed in their finest for the occasion. The unmated women, there were perhaps 40 of them, stood in a line along one side of the room, displayed like prizes at a fair. Rowena stood among them, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. The alphas circled like sharks. Some were old, some young, some handsome, some cruel-faced. It didn't matter. They all had the same look in their eyes: ownership, possession, the certainty that whatever they wanted, they could take. King Aldrich sat on his throne, watching it all with an expression of supreme boredom. He never participated in the choosing. Kings didn't need to hunt for mates. They could simply take whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted. Rowena had heard the stories about him, the women he'd bedded and discarded, the ones who'd hoped he might bond with them, only to be cast aside when he grew tired. He was too powerful to need a mate, too dangerous to want one. "Welcome, my lords," announced the master of ceremonies, a pompous alpha with a voice like honey over gravel. "Tonight, you have the privilege of selecting your bonded mates from the finest unbonded women in the kingdom. Choose wisely, for the bond is eternal." The hunting began. Alphas approached the line of women, looking them over like horses at market. Some asked questions. What skills did they have? Could they bear children? Were they obedient? The women answered with downcast eyes and soft voices, trying to make themselves appealing without seeming too forward. Rowena stood rigid, staring straight ahead, praying to be invisible. "This one's too thin," said an alpha with a belly that hung over his belt. He moved on. "Lovely eyes," murmured another, tilting a blonde girl's chin up. "But I prefer brunettes." The woman next to Rowena was chosen within minutes, a barren son with kind eyes and a gentle voice. The woman looked genuinely pleased, and Rowena felt a stab of pity. She didn't understand yet. The kind ones were sometimes worse, because you remembered who they used to be before the bond turned you into their perfect toy. An hour passed, then 2. The hall grew warmer, stuffier. Rowena's feet ached in her thin shoes. Around her, women were being selected one by one, led away to be bonded in private ceremonies. Their spots in the line remained empty, like gaps in a smile. She was starting to think she might actually escape notice when a hand gripped her chin, forcing her head up. The alpha was middle-aged, with wine-stained breath and calculating eyes. His grip was too tight, almost painful. "This one," he said to no one in particular. "What's your name?" "Rowena." Her voice came out flat, emotionless. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "So?" "Yes." His eyes traveled down her body in a way that made her skin crawl. "You're pretty enough. A bit scrawny, but that can be fixed once you're carrying my child." Rowena's stomach turned. "Can you follow orders?" he pressed. Simple question, girl. Can you do as you're told?" And there it was. The question beneath the question. Would she be obedient? Would she break easily? Would she make a good, compliant little mate who never questioned, never argued, never had a thought of her own? Every woman in the line had answered yes to this question, or some version of it. It was the only acceptable answer. Rowena looked him in the eyes. "No," she said clearly. The hall went deathly quiet. The alpha's grip on her chin tightened until she thought her jaw might crack. "What did you say?" I said no. Her heart was thundering so hard she could barely hear herself speak, but her voice didn't shake. I'm not a possession. I'm not yours to claim. I'm not anyone's. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The other women in line shrank back as if her defiance might be contagious. Lena made a small, horrified sound. The alpha's face went purple with rage. His hand drew back, whether to strike her or force the bond she never found out. Lord Garrett! King Aldrich's voice cut through the air like a blade, cold and absolute. Step back. Garrett released her immediately, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched his knees. Your Majesty, I apologize for the disturbance. The girl is clearly unfit for bonding. Defective. She should be removed. I will decide what she is. Aldrich rose from his throne and the room seemed to shrink around him. The temperature dropped. The candles flickered. Rowena's breath caught in her throat. He was walking toward her. Every step sent waves of power rippling through the room, ancient, overwhelming, the kind of dominance that made grown alphas bow and omegas whimper. She could feel it pressing against her skin, trying to force her to her knees. She locked her joints and stayed standing. Aldrich stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough that his power washed over her like a physical thing. This close, she could feel the weight of centuries in him, the bloodlines of a dozen conquered kingdoms, the deaths of 1,000 enemies, the absolute certainty of a man who had never been denied anything he wanted. Rowena, was it? His voice was quiet, almost conversational. She managed a nod. Look at me. Her eyes snapped to his against her will. There was something in his gaze she couldn't read. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition. As if he saw something in her he hadn't expected. You refuse the bond? He asked. The smart answer was to backtrack, to apologize, to grovel and beg for mercy and promise she'd been momentarily insane. And of course she wanted to be bonded. It would be an honor. She'd be grateful for any alpha who chose her. Rowena had never been particularly smart. I refuse to be broken, she whispered. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, definitely. Maybe respect. For a heartbeat, she thought he might actually understand, thought he might let her go. Then his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. The bond hit her like lightning. It wasn't like Brennan's bond had been with Alara, gentle at first, coaxing, seducing before it crushed. This was raw power, ancient and absolute, slamming into her with the force of a flood. She could feel it wrapping around her soul, trying to burrow into her mind, seeking purchase. And it was the king's bond, the strongest in the kingdom, the kind of power that could level cities and break armies. It was trying to break her. Rowena screamed, not in surrender, in pure incandescent rage. She tore her wrist from his grip with strength she didn't know she had, and ran. The hall erupted in chaos. Guards shouted. Nobles scattered. The unmated women shrieked in confusion and terror. Someone tried to grab her, Garrett probably, still hoping to claim her, but she dodged, her body moving on pure instinct. Seize her! Aldrich's voice boomed through the hall, shaking the chandeliers. But Rowena was already gone, bolting through the doors and into the corridor beyond. She didn't know where she was running, didn't care. The bond was still there, wrapped around her like barbed wire, burning through her veins. But it wasn't complete. She'd broken free before it could fully latch, and now it was pulling at her, trying to drag her back. Run! Her body screamed. Run! 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 Behind her, the thunder of boots on stone. The guards were coming. She took a corner too fast, slammed into a wall, kept moving. Her lungs burned. Her vision blurred with tears. Every nerve in her body was on fire from the partial bond, and she could feel Aldrich's presence like a hook in her chest, reeling her in. There! Someone shouted. Arrows whistled past her head. One grazed her arm, tearing fabric and skin. She bit back a scream and dove down a side passage. This one darker, narrower. The Eastern Tower. She had to reach the Eastern Tower. But the bond was getting stronger. She could feel Aldrich getting closer, feel his power reaching for her through the connection she'd accidentally created. It was like trying to run with an anchor chained to her ankle. Stop running, Garrett's voice echoed behind her. You're only making it worse. She ignored him. Worse than what? Worse than being broken? Worse than losing herself? There was nothing worse than that. The corridor opened into a courtyard, the old training yard, unused now. Moonlight spilled across broken flagstones and rusted weapons, and there, on the far side, was the entrance to the eastern tower. She was halfway across when they caught her. A guard tackled her from behind, and they went down hard. Her head cracked against stone and stars exploded across her vision. Strong hands pinned her arms. Got her. Don't let her move. The king's coming. Rowena thrashed, kicking, biting, fighting with everything she had. She caught one guard in the face with her elbow and heard a satisfying crunch. Another grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. Vicious little thing, isn't she? The bond will fix that. The courtyard filled with guards, with nobles who'd followed to watch the spectacle. And then the crowd parted and King Aldrich walked through. His eyes were blazing gold, pure alpha fury, but beneath it, Rowena saw something else. Confusion, uncertainty. Release her, he said quietly. The guards hesitated. Your Majesty, she's dangerous. I said release her. They let go immediately, backing away. Rowena scrambled to her feet, putting distance between herself and Aldrich. Her back hit the wall of the courtyard. Trapped. You can feel it, can't you? Aldrich's voice was soft now, almost gentle. The bond. It's already there, already connecting us. Why are you fighting it? Because I've seen what it does, Rowena spat. Blood ran from the cut on her arm, hot and wet. I've watched it destroy every woman it touches. I won't let it destroy me. It doesn't have to be destruction. It can be love. She laughed, the sound bitter and broken. I watched Alara scream as your beta's bond hollowed her out. I watched her beg and fight and lose, and then I watched her smile at him like she'd never wanted anything else. That's not love. That's murder. Something in Aldrich's expression shifted. You think the bond killed her? I know it did. The girl she was is gone. What's left is just... Rowena's voice cracked. Just a shell that says yes. The bond reveals who we truly are, Aldrich said, but there was doubt in his voice now. It brings us together. It breaks us down. It takes everything we are and replaces it with what you want us to be. And you call it sacred. She straightened, even though every muscle in her body was screaming at her to run. I won't let you break me. I'd rather die. I don't want to break you, Aldrich said, and he sounded almost lost. I want... The bond pulsed between them, and Rowena gasped as power flooded through her again. But this time, she could feel something else through the connection. His emotions, raw and unfiltered. Confusion, frustration, and underneath it all, a loneliness so deep it made her chest ache. He was just as trapped as she was, just as alone. For a moment, something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Recognition of two souls caught in a system neither of them had chosen. Then Garrett stepped forward, his face twisted with malice. Your Majesty, if you won't complete the bond, allow me to handle this situation. A few days in the cells should teach her the value of obedience. The moment shattered. Aldrich's eyes narrowed. You presume to tell your king, I presume to protect the natural order, Garrett interrupted, his boldness surprising everyone. If word spreads that a woman can refuse the bond, can reject an alpha's claim, the entire kingdom will fall into chaos. She must be made an example of. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. He's right, someone said. Can't have women thinking they can just refuse. Needs to be punished, publicly. Rowena saw her death in their faces. Even if Aldrich didn't want to break her, the court would demand it. The system would demand it. And he was just one man, even if he was king. She looked at the eastern tower, so close and yet impossibly far. Then she looked at Aldrich. Their eyes met, and through the bond she felt his choice before he made it. Take her to the tower, he said quietly. Lock her in the upper chamber. No one is to touch her without my explicit command. Your Majesty, Garrett began. Are you questioning me, Lord Garrett? The temperature dropped 20 degrees. Frost formed on the flagstones. Garrett went white and dropped to his knees. No, Your Majesty, of course not. Good. Because the next person who questions my authority will find themselves short ahead. Aldrich's gaze swept the courtyard. Is that clear? Silence. Then a chorus of, Yes, Your Majesty. The guards grabbed Rowena again, gentler this time, but no less firm. As they dragged her toward the eastern tower, she locked eyes with Aldrich one more time. Why? She wanted to ask. Why save me, even like this? Through the bond, his answer came like a whisper. Because you're right, and I don't know what to do about it. Then they pulled her into the darkness, and the courtyard disappeared behind her. Rowena had refused the bond. She'd run from the king himself, and somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. But locked in a tower with the partial bond still burning through her veins and the entire court calling for her blood, she didn't know how long that would last. All she knew was that she hadn't broken. Not yet. And as long as she could still think, still feel, still rage against what they wanted to turn her into, she would keep fighting, even if it killed her, especially if it killed her. Because some cages were worse than death, and Rowena would rather burn than become another empty-eyed shell in the king's collection. The real battle was just beginning. The tower room smelled like rot and forgotten things. They'd thrown her in without ceremony, just shoved her through the door and slammed it shut behind her. The lock clicked with a finality that made her stomach drop. She was alone now, truly alone, with nothing but stone walls and the bond still burning through her veins like poison. Rowena pressed her back against the door and slid down to the floor, her legs finally giving out. Her whole body was shaking, from fear, from exhaustion, from the partial bond that kept pulling at her insides like fishhooks. She could still feel Aldrich somewhere in the fortress, a distant pressure at the edge of her mind, and it made her want to claw her own skin off. The room was circular, maybe 20 feet across, with a single narrow window set high in the wall. Moonlight streamed through it, illuminating dust motes and cobwebs. There was a cot in the corner, a chamber pot, nothing else. They'd locked her in what was essentially a prison cell and called it mercy. She laughed, the sound cracking in her throat. Mercy. Right. Her arm throbbed where the arrow had grazed it, blood soaking through the torn sleeve of her dress. She needed to bind it, needed to do something about the wound before it got infected. But she couldn't seem to make herself move. All the adrenaline that had carried her through the run, through the confrontation, was draining away, leaving nothing but bone-deep terror in its wake. I'm gonna die here, she thought distantly. They'll leave me in this tower until I go mad, and then they'll drag me out and force the bond on me anyway, and I'll become just another empty shell. The bond pulsed, responding to her despair, and she felt Aldrich's presence grow stronger. Could he feel her emotions too? Could he sense her fear, her rage, her absolute refusal to surrender? She hoped he could. She hoped it kept him awake at night. Footsteps on the stairs outside made her scramble to her feet, her heart racing. The door swung open, and a guard stepped through carrying a tray. He was young, barely older than she was, with nervous eyes that wouldn't quite meet hers. Food, he muttered, setting the tray on the floor. Stale bread, some kind of thin soup, water. And bandages. For your arm. He turned to leave. Wait, Rowena said, her voice rough. What's going to happen to me? The guard hesitated in the doorway. Don't know. The king hasn't decided yet. They want him to kill me, don't they? The court. They want him to finish the bond, make an example of you. The guard finally looked at her, and there was something like pity in his face. You shouldn't have run. It only made it worse. Worse than what? Worse than losing myself? He shook his head. The bond isn't what you think. My sister, she was bonded last year. She's happy now. Really happy. Is she herself? Rowena asked quietly. Or is she what her alpha wants her to be? The guard's expression faltered. He opened his mouth, closed it, then left without answering. The lock clicked behind him. Rowena sank back down to the floor, the brief spark of defiance guttering out. She picked at the bread but couldn't stomach more than a few bites. The soup was cold and tasted like dishwater. She used the bandages to wrap her arm, her hands clumsy and shaking. Then she waited. Hours crawled by. The moon moved across the sky, the slice of light from the window shifting across the floor. She tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ilara's face as the bond broke her, heard her screams echoing in the ceremony hall. And underneath it all, the bond with Aldrich kept tugging at her, a constant reminder that she wasn't free, would never be free. Even if she somehow escaped this tower, escaped the fortress, the bond would follow her, pull her back, drag her to her knees eventually, unless she found a way to break it. The thought came suddenly, sharp and clear. break the bond. It had never been done before. Once formed, the bond was supposed to be eternal, unbreakable. But hers wasn't complete. She'd torn away before Aldrich could finish the claiming, and now the connection between them was raw, unstable. Maybe, just maybe, that meant it could be severed. She stood and crossed to the window, pulling herself up on the ledge to look out. The drop was dizzying, straight down the cliff face to jagged rocks hundreds of feet below. But in the distance, beyond the fortress walls, she could see the forest, miles and miles of dark trees stretching toward the mountains. Freedom. If she could just reach it. But first she had to survive long enough to try. She woke to the sound of shouting. Rowena jerked upright on the cot, her heart hammering. Daylight streamed through the window. She must have dozed off, despite her best efforts. The shouting was coming from somewhere below, multiple voices raised in anger. Then the door burst open. It wasn't the young guard this time. It was Garrett, flanked by two of his men, his face twisted with rage, and something worse, triumph. "Get up," he snarled. Rowena pressed herself against the wall. "The king said no one was to touch me. The king isn't here." Garrett stalked toward her, and she could smell wine on his breath. "He left this morning to deal with a border dispute. Won't be back for days. And in his absence, I'm in charge of fortress security." Her blood ran cold. "You can't..." "Can't what? Enforce order? Protect the kingdom from rebellious little whores who think they're above the natural law?" He grabbed her arm, the injured one, and she screamed as pain lanced through her. "You humiliated me in front of the entire court. You refused me. Me. Let go." He backhanded her across the face. The world exploded in stars and pain. She tasted blood, felt her lips split open. Before she could recover, Garrett's hand was in her hair, yanking her head back. "You're going to learn your place," he hissed, "and when the king returns, he'll find you broken and ready to accept his bond like you should have from the start." Terror flooded her veins. "He'll kill you for this. He'll thank me. I'm doing what he was too weak to do himself." Garrett nodded to his men. "Take her to the lower cells. Make sure she understands the consequences of defiance." They dragged her from the room, and she fought every step of the way. Kicked, bit, clawed at them with her broken nails. One of the guards cursed as she drew blood, and someone hit her in the stomach hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. The world tilted and spun. They hauled her down the tower stairs, through corridors she didn't recognize, deeper into the fortress than she'd ever been. The air grew colder, damper. The walls wept with moisture. The cells were worse than she'd imagined. Iron bars crusted with rust, straw rotting on the floor, the stench of human waste and despair. They threw her into one of the cages and slammed the door shut. 3 days, Garrett said, looking down at her with cold satisfaction. 3 days down here with no food, no light, no comfort. Then we'll see if you're still so eager to refuse the bond. The king, Garrett interrupted, will be told you tried to escape, that you attacked the guards, that you gave us no choice but to restrain you." He smiled, and it was the cruelest thing she'd ever seen. Who do you think he'll believe? His trusted beta or a servant girl who already ran from him once? He turned and walked away, taking the torch with him. The other guards followed, their footsteps echoing on stone. Then the door slammed shut, and darkness swallowed everything. Rowena huddled in this corner of the cell, her arms wrapped around her knees, and tried not to panic. But the darkness was absolute, pressing against her eyes like a physical weight. She couldn't see her own hands in front of her face, couldn't see anything, and in the darkness, the bond grew stronger. Without light, without distraction, she could feel Aldrich's presence more clearly than ever. It was like a rope tied around her chest, pulling tight with every breath. She could sense his emotions bleeding through, frustration, anger, something that might have been concern. Could he feel what was happening to her? Did he know Garrett had defied his orders? She tried to reach out through the bond, tried to send some kind of message, but she didn't know how. The connection was there, but she couldn't control it, couldn't use it. It just sat in her chest like a tumor, draining her strength. Time became meaningless in the dark. She might have been there for hours or days. There was no way to tell. Her stomach cramped with hunger. Her throat burned with thirst. The cut on her arm throbbed, hot and infected. She drifted in and out of consciousness, fever dreams blending with waking nightmares. In the dreams, the bond completed itself. She felt it wrap around her mind like chains, felt her will dissolve under its weight, felt herself becoming the thing she feared most, empty, obedient, broken. She woke screaming more than once, her voice echoing off the walls until it died into nothing. On what she thought might be the second day, she heard footsteps approaching. Hope flared painfully in her chest. Maybe the king had returned. Maybe he'd found out what Garrett had done. But it was just one of Garrett's guards, bringing a cup of water so stale it made her gag. He shoved it through the bars without a word and left again. "Please," she called after him, her voice cracking. "Please, I need—" The door slammed. She drank the water anyway, every drop, and tried not to think about how much worse it could get. It got worse. The fever spiked on the third day. Her arm was swollen, the wound angry and leaking pus. She was shivering so hard her teeth chattered, but her skin felt like it was on fire. The bond was a constant scream in her head now, Aldrich's presence so overwhelming she couldn't think past it. And in her delirium, she started to hear voices. "Just give in," they whispered. "Stop fighting. It would be so easy to just let go. You're going to die down here anyway. At least if you accept the bond, you'll live. What's so important about staying yourself? What has it gotten you? Pain, fear, loneliness. The bond would take all of that away. You'd never hurt again, never fear again, never be alone again." The voices were seductive, logical. They made sense in a way that terrified her, because part of her was starting to believe them. She was so tired, so hungry and hurt and scared, and the bond kept pulling at her, offering comfort, offering peace, offering an end to all of this if she'd just surrender. It would be so easy. "No," she whispered into the darkness. "No, no, no." But her resolve was crumbling. She could feel it happening, feel herself coming apart at the seams. How much longer could she hold out? Another day? Another hour? The door to the cells crashed open. Footsteps. Multiple sets, moving fast. Torchlight blazed to life, blinding her after so long in the dark. She threw up an arm to shield her eyes, whimpering. "There," someone shouted. "The king said she'd be— Oh, hell, she's in bad shape." Keys rattled in the lock. The cell door swung open. Strong hands grabbed her arms, gentler than Garrett's men had been, but she flinched anyway. "Easy, easy. We're here to help. The king sent us." She blinked up through fever-blurred eyes. The guard was older, grizzled, with a scar across his cheek. Behind him stood three others, all wearing the king's colors. "Aldrich?" she managed. "He rode through the night to get back, found out what Lord Garrett did." The guard was lifting her now, cradling her like a child. "Said to bring you to the healer immediately. Can you walk?" She tried. Her legs gave out immediately. "Right, we'll carry you then." He barked orders at the others. "You two, find Lord Garrett and bring him to the throne room in chains. You, go ahead and tell the healer to prepare for infection and fever." They moved fast, carrying her up through the fortress. Rowena drifted in and out, catching fragments of conversation. "Never should have left. Garrett's going to hang for this. Bond's half killing her, can't you see?" She was placed on something soft. A bed, she realized dimly. Clean sheets. The first comfort she'd felt in days. Someone was washing her arm, and she screamed as they cleaned the infected wound. "Hold her down. This is going to hurt." Pain exploded through her as they cut away the dead tissue, packed the wound with something that burned like fire. She thrashed, trying to get away, but hands held her firm. "Almost done. Just breathe." Then a woman's voice, older, calm. "The fever's too high. And the bond, it's tearing her apart from the inside. If something isn't done soon, it'll kill her. Can you break it?" A male voice, the scarred guard. "No one can break a bond, but the king might be able to complete it, ease the strain." "No!" Rowena tried to sit up, tried to make them understand. "No bond. I can't." "Hush, child, you're delirious." "I'm not." But the room was spinning, darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. "Please, don't let them." She felt the bond pulse violently, and then Aldrich's presence was there, so close it felt like he was standing right next to her. "I'm coming," she heard through the connection. "Hold on." Then everything went black. Whoop. She woke to arguing. "Complete lack of judgment. You left a prisoner in Garrett's care? A man you know covets power? I didn't think he'd dare defy a direct order. Then you're a fool. Rowena's eyes fluttered open. She was in a different room now, larger, warmer, with actual windows letting in afternoon light. Her arm was properly bandaged, and someone had dressed her in a clean nightgown. The fever had broken, leaving her weak and wrung out but clear-headed. Two men stood near the door, their backs to her. One was Aldrich. She recognized him even from behind, recognized the way the bond pulled toward him. The other was older, gray-haired, wearing robes that marked him as someone important. An advisor, maybe. The girl is your mate, whether you like it or not, the older man was saying. The bond exists. You need to complete it before it destroys you both. I won't force her. Aldrich's voice was tight, with barely controlled rage. I've seen what the forced bond does. I won't do that to her. Then what? You'll just let her die? Because that's what will happen if this continues. The partial bond is unstable. It's already making her sick, making you volatile. Complete it, and at least she'll survive. As what? A shell? A puppet? Aldrich turned, and Rowena saw his face for the first time since the tower. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes, his jaw tight with tension. She'd rather die than accept it. She told me so. Then she's a fool too. Or maybe she's the only honest person in this entire fortress. Aldrich's laugh was bitter. She's right, you know, about the bond. I've watched it break women my entire life. My father's mates, my uncles, Garrett's, they all became something less than they were. I just never let myself think about it too hard. The bond is sacred. The bond is a tool of control, and we've been using it to enslave half the population for generations. Aldrich raked a hand through his hair. She made me see that, and now I don't know what to do about it. Rowena's breath caught. He'd been listening, actually listening. The advisor sighed. Your Majesty, I understand your crisis of conscience, but the reality remains— The reality, Rowena said, her voice weak but steady, is that I'm awake. So you can stop talking about me like I'm not here. Both men spun around. Aldrich reached her bedside in 3 strides. You shouldn't be sitting up. The healer said— I'm fine. She wasn't, not really, but she'd be damned if she'd show weakness in front of him. Where's Garrett? In the dungeons, Aldrich said flatly, awaiting trial for defying a royal command and torturing a prisoner. Good. Rowena. He reached for her hand, then stopped himself. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have left. I didn't think he would— He did. She met his eyes, and through the bond, she felt his guilt like a living thing. And he'll do it again if you give him the chance. Men like that don't stop just because they get punished once. He won't get another chance. I'm having him exiled. Not executed? Aldrich hesitated. The law requires a trial. Evidence. Due process. The law, Rowena said bitterly, protects men like him and enslaves women like me. Forgive me if I don't have much faith in it. The advisor cleared his throat. Perhaps I should give you two some privacy. Stay, Aldrich said sharply. Then softer. Please, I need a witness for this. He turned back to Rowena, and something in his expression made her heart race. You were right, he said quietly. About the bond. About everything. I've been willfully blind to what it does, what it takes from people. And I can't undo that. But I can make you a promise. What promise? I won't complete the bond. Not unless you explicitly ask me to, of your own free will, with no coercion or pressure. His eyes were burning with intensity. Even if it kills me, even if it kills us both, I won't take your choice away. Rowena stared at him. You're serious? Yes, the court will never accept that. Then the court can go to hell. A muscle jumped in his jaw. I'm the king. They'll accept what I tell them to accept. And if they don't, then I'll find new advisors who will. The older man made a strangled sound. Your Majesty, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Aldrich didn't look away from Rowena. You asked me once what made me different from the men who used the bond to control women. The answer is nothing. I'm just as complicit, just as guilty. But maybe I can start making different choices now. Rowena felt something crack open in her chest. Not the bond, something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Why? She whispered. Why would you risk everything for me? Because you're not just for me. You're yourself. A person with your own thoughts, your own will, your own right to choose your own fate. He smiled, sad and tired. And maybe because in a lifetime of being surrounded by people who tell me yes, you're the first person brave enough to tell me no. The bond pulsed between them, but it felt different now. Less like chains, more like a connection, a bridge instead of a prison. Rowena took a shaky breath. The bond's still there. It's still pulling at both of us. What happens if we just leave it like this? I don't know, Aldrich admitted. It's never been done before. The pain might fade, or it might get worse. We might both go mad, but whatever happens, it'll be your choice. That's all I can offer you. She looked at him, really looked at him, saw the exhaustion, the guilt, the genuine desire to do better. He wasn't perfect. He was arrogant and powerful and had probably done terrible things in his time as king, but he was trying. That had to count for something. I want to leave, she said suddenly. The fortress, the kingdom, all of it. I want to go somewhere the bond can't find me, somewhere I can just be. Pain flashed across Aldrich's face, but he nodded. I'll arrange it, coin, supplies, an escort to get you safely beyond the borders. No escort. I go alone. Rowena, you're still recovering alone, she repeated firmly. Or not at all. He studied her for a long moment, then sighed. You're impossible. I'm free, she corrected, or I will be. You'll always be free, Aldrich said quietly. Bond or no bond. That's what I'm promising you. And somehow, impossibly, she believed him. But as the advisor left muttering about the downfall of civilization, and Aldrich started making arrangements for her departure, Rowena felt the bond pulse with warning. Because out in the courtyard, Garrett sat in his cell and plotted revenge. And somewhere in the shadows of the fortress, other men who saw the old order crumbling and feared what would replace it, began to whisper about betrayal. The king had chosen the girl over tradition, over law, over everything they'd built, and for that, someone was going to have to pay. The whispers started the next morning. Rowena heard them as she walked through the corridors with her armed escort, 2 guards Aldrich had assigned to keep her safe until her departure. The nobles and servants who'd once ignored her now stared openly, their voices dropping to hushed murmurs as she passed. Refuses the king himself. Unnatural, that's what it is. Should have been executed for defiance. She kept her head high and her eyes forward, but each word was a needle under her skin. The healer had cleared her for travel, though her arms still ached, and the fever had left her weak. 3 more days, Aldrich had said. 3 days to gather supplies and arrange safe passage beyond the kingdom's borders. 3 days felt like an eternity. Don't listen to them, said the younger of her guards, a man named Cormac with kind eyes. They're just scared. Of what? Rowena asked. Me? Of change. Of what it means if a woman can refuse the bond and live. He glanced at her. You've given people ideas. Dangerous ideas. Ideas like freedom? Like I said, dangerous. They reached the king's private wing, and the guard stepped aside to let her enter Aldrich's study alone. He was bent over a desk covered in maps and documents, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. You should be resting, he said without looking up. I've been resting for 2 days. I'm fine. She moved closer, studying the maps. What are you doing? Planning your route. His finger traced a path through the mountains. The eastern passage is safest, but it's also the longest. The northern route is faster, but more dangerous. Bandits, wolves, harsh terrain. I'll take north. Rowena, I need to leave quickly, and you know it. Every day I stay here, I put you at risk. She met his eyes. The court's already turning against you. How long before they try to force your hand? His jaw tightened. Let me worry about the court. They're planning something. I can feel it. And she could. A wrongness in the air, a tension that set her teeth on edge. Garrett's allies won't just accept his exile. They'll want revenge. Garrett's locked in the dungeons. His allies are cowards who won't move without him. You're underestimating them. And you're paranoid. But there was doubt in his voice. The door burst open. Aldrich's chief advisor, the gray-haired man from before, whose name was Theron, strode in with a scroll clutched in his hand. Your Majesty, we have a problem. Aldrich straightened. What kind of problem? 3 members of the High Council have submitted formal petitions demanding an emergency session. Thurin's face was grim. They're calling for your removal on grounds of abandoning the sacred traditions of the kingdom. The room went cold. On what grounds? Aldrich's voice was dangerously quiet. On the grounds that you've refused to complete a royal bond, shown favor to a commoner who defied the natural order, and sentenced a noble lord without proper trial. Theron set the scroll on the desk. They're claiming you're unfit to rule. That's treason. They're calling it intervention, and they have support, at least 1/3 of the council, maybe more. Theron looked older than his years. Your Majesty, if you don't act decisively, they will move against you, and the law is on their side. Rowena felt the bond pulse with Aldrich's fury. The law is whatever I say it is. I'm the king, a king who can be deposed by a unanimous council vote if deemed incompetent or dangerous to the realm. Theron's voice was gentle but firm. It's never been done before, but the provision exists. Your grandfather put it in place after the mad King Rowan nearly destroyed the kingdom. I'm not mad. No, but you're breaking every precedent, every tradition. To them, that's just as dangerous. Aldrich turned away, his hands braced on the desk. Through the bond, Rowena felt his mind racing, calculating, trying to find a way out of the trap closing around them. When is the session? He asked finally. Tonight, sunset. They invoke the emergency clause, which means you have to attend. And if I refuse? They can vote in absentia. Better to face them directly. Aldrich nodded slowly. Fine. Prepare the council chamber, and double the guard. I don't trust these bastards not to try something. Theron bowed and left. The moment the door closed, Aldrich slammed his fist on the desk, hard enough to make the maps jump. This is my fault, Rowena said quietly. If I'd just accepted the bond. Don't. He turned to her, his eyes blazing. Don't you dare take responsibility for their fear and hatred. You did nothing wrong. I broke everything. The order, the traditions. The order was broken long before you came along. It just took someone brave enough to point it out. He crossed to her, and she saw exhaustion written in every line of his face. I meant what I said. I won't force the bond, not even to save my throne. Then you'll lose it. Maybe. Or maybe it's time this kingdom had a different kind of king. He smiled, bitter and tired. One who doesn't build his power on the backs of broken women. The bond surged between them, and for a moment Rowena felt the full weight of what he was offering to sacrifice. His crown, his power, his entire world. For her. For a principle. For the idea that people deserve to choose their own fates. You're an idiot, she whispered. So I've been told. She reached out and took his hand, ignoring the way the bond flared hot at the contact. Then let me help. Let me testify at the council session. Let me tell them why I refused. Absolutely not. If they see you as the cause of this, they'll kill me? They already want to. She squeezed his hand. But if they hear me, if they see that I'm not some mindless rebel, but a person with legitimate grievances, maybe some of them will listen. You have too much faith in politicians, and you have too little faith in people. She pulled away, straightening her shoulders. I'm not hiding while you fight my battle. If the council wants to condemn me, they'll do it to my face. Aldrich stared at her for a long moment, then laughed. A real laugh, surprised and almost admiring. You really are impossible. I prefer determined, stubborn, brave, reckless, all of the above. She smiled despite everything. So, will you let me speak? He sighed. I don't think I could stop you if I tried. Smart man. But as she left to prepare, neither of them noticed the shadow that detached itself from the corridor outside. A servant, nondescript and easily overlooked, who'd heard every word. The servant hurried through the fortress to a locked door in the lower levels. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 more. The door opened to reveal Lord Garrett, free of his chains, surrounded by a dozen armed men. Well, Garrett demanded. The girl will testify at the council session tonight, the servant said. She'll be in the open, vulnerable. Garrett's smile was vicious. Perfect. Tell the others to be ready. Tonight, we end this farce. And the king? The king, Garrett said slowly, We'll learn what happens when you put a woman above the natural order. He'll watch her die, and then he'll beg us to complete the bond that will fix his broken mind." The servant bowed and disappeared. Garrett turned to his men, most of them younger sons of noble houses with everything to lose if the old order collapsed. "Tonight," he told them, "we restore the kingdom to what it should be, and anyone who stands in our way, king included, will fall." The council chamber was a circular room with tiered seating designed so every member could see and be seen. Rowena entered, flanked by Cormac and another guard, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The counselors were already assembled, 20 men, all alphas, all powerful. They watched her enter with expressions ranging from disgust to cold calculation. At the center sat Aldrich on a throne smaller than his formal one, but no less imposing. His eyes found hers across the room, and through the bond she felt his worry, his anger, his desperate hope that this might somehow work. "The emergency session will come to order," Theron announced from his position beside the throne. "We are here to address concerns raised by members of the High Council regarding His Majesty's recent actions and decisions." "Recent madness, you mean?" said a voice from the tiers. "Lord Castor, an old alpha with more power than sense. The king has lost his way. He refuses to complete a sacred bond, elevates a servant above her station, and punishes nobles for upholding tradition." "I punished a man for torturing a prisoner against my explicit orders," Aldrich said coldly. "If you have a problem with that, Castor, perhaps you'd like to join Garrett in exile." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Another counselor stood, Lord Brentwood, younger and more polished than Castor, but no less hostile. "Your Majesty, we understand you feel protective of this woman. The bond creates strong emotions, but your refusal to complete it is causing instability. The court is in chaos. The servants are questioning their place. Women across the kingdom are hearing about a girl who refused and lived, and they're getting ideas." "Ideas about freedom?" Rowena spoke up, her voice cutting through the mutters. "Ideas about having a choice in their own fates." "You weren't given permission to speak," Brentwood snapped. "I'm giving it to her," Aldrich said. "Rowena, tell them why you refused." She stepped forward into the center of the room, and every eye turned to her. This close, she could feel the weight of their alpha power pressing down, trying to make her bow, make her submit. She locked her knees and stayed standing. "I refused because I watched the bond break a girl named Ilara," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "I watched her scream and beg and fight, and then I watched all of that disappear. The girl who existed before the bond was gone. What was left was a shell that said and did exactly what her alpha wanted." "That's how the bond works," Castor said dismissively. "It creates harmony. It creates slavery." Rowena's voice rose. "You call it harmony when a woman loses the ability to disagree, to choose, to be anything other than an extension of her alpha's will? That's not love. That's not sacred. That's control. And you've built an entire society on it. How dare you?" "I dare because someone has to." She turned in a slow circle, meeting as many eyes as she could. "How many of you have bonded mates? How many of them were truly themselves before the bond? How many could tell you no, could challenge you, could leave you if they wanted?" Silence. Damning, absolute silence. "That's what I thought." Rowena's hands were shaking, but her voice didn't waver. "You don't want partners. You want possessions, and the bond gives you that. But it costs everything those women used to be." "This is outrageous," Brentwood sputtered. "Your Majesty, she's poisoning—" "She's telling the truth," Aldrich said quietly. "A truth we've all been ignoring for generations because it's convenient, because it gives us power." He stood, and his presence filled the room. "I've been thinking about this since she ran, really thinking, and she's right. The bond as we use it, as we've always used it, is wrong." The chamber erupted. "Blasphemy! The king has been corrupted. This is exactly what we feared." Theron called for order, but the counselors ignored him. They were on their feet now, shouting over each other, their faces red with fury and fear. And in the chaos, Rowena felt something shift, a wrongness in the air, a building pressure like a storm about to break. "Something's wrong," she said, but her voice was lost in the noise. Then the doors exploded inward. Garrett strode through with a dozen armed men, their swords drawn, their eyes hard. Blood dripped from one blade. The guards outside hadn't stood a chance. "Enough!" Garrett roared, and the room fell silent. "This farce ends now!" Aldrich was moving before anyone else could react, putting himself between Garrett and Rowena. "Stand down, Garrett. You're only making this worse." "Worse? You've already destroyed everything trying to protect this worthless—" Garrett's eyes locked on Rowena with pure hatred. "She dies. Tonight. And then maybe you'll come to your senses. You'll have to go through me, if that's what it takes." Garrett raised his sword. "For the kingdom, for tradition, for the natural order." Half the council stood, some moving to Aldrich's defense, others toward Garrett. The chamber was splitting right down the middle, between those who wanted change and those who'd kill to prevent it. Cormac pushed Rowena behind him, his own sword drawn. "Get back, my lady." "I'm not a lady," she said absently, her mind racing. This was it. The moment everything either fell apart or somehow, impossibly, came together. The bond pulsed wildly, Aldrich's fear and rage flooding through it. She could feel him preparing to fight, preparing to die if necessary to protect her. And suddenly she understood. The bond wasn't the enemy. The way it was used was. The forcing, the breaking, the crushing of will under will, that was the weapon. But the connection itself, the link between souls, that could be something else entirely. "Stop," she said. No one heard her. "Stop!" Power exploded from her. Not alpha dominance, but something else. Something new. The bond between her and Aldrich flared brilliant gold, visible to everyone in the room, and through it she felt something unlock. Not surrender, not submission, understanding. She could feel Aldrich's mind, his heart, his absolute refusal to let her be hurt. And she let him feel hers, her fear, her rage, her desperate need to survive as herself. And more than that, she let him feel her gratitude, her respect, her recognition that he was trying, genuinely trying, to be better than what he'd been raised to be. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was real. The golden light spread, and for a moment the entire chamber was bathed in it. The bond, raw and unfinished, and completely unlike anything they'd ever seen, hung in the air between Rowena and Aldrich like a living thing. And it didn't break her. She stood in the center of it, still herself, still angry, still terrified, but connected to him in a way that enhanced, rather than erased. "Impossible," someone whispered. Garrett stared, his face going pale. "That's not... It can't... The bond doesn't work that way." "Maybe," Rowena said, her voice ringing clear. "You've been doing it wrong." The light faded, but the bond remained, visible only to her and Aldrich now, but changed. Different. A bridge instead of a chain. Through it, she felt Aldrich's shock, his wonder, his sudden desperate hope that maybe there was a way forward neither of them had imagined. But Garrett saw only his power crumbling. "No," he snarled. "No, this ends now. Kill her!" His men surged forward, and chaos exploded through the chamber. Steel rang against steel as Aldrich's loyal guards engaged Garrett's forces. Counselors scrambled for cover or joined the fight. Blood sprayed across marble floors. Cormac was fighting off two attackers, his sword a blur. Aldrich had engaged Garrett directly, their blades crashing together with enough force to shake the walls. And Rowena stood in the center of it all, unarmed and vulnerable, as one of Garrett's men broke through the line and charged straight at her. She saw the sword coming, saw death in the man's eyes, saw her entire desperate bid for freedom about to end in blood and failure. The bond screamed. Aldrich felt her danger through the connection and turned, trying to reach her, but Garrett was in the way, and there were too many bodies between them, and she was going to die. Something inside Rowena snapped, not broke, not surrendered, awakened. The bond had been pulling power from Aldrich since it formed, small amounts, barely noticeable. But in her terror, in her rage, in her absolute refusal to die here, after coming so far, she grabbed that power and pulled. Alpha dominance flooded through her, raw and overwhelming. Her eyes flashed gold. "Stop," she commanded. The man attacking her stopped mid-swing, his eyes going wide with shock. Not because the bond had broken his will, but because she'd used the power it gave her to match his strength, to meet his dominance with her own. The sword fell from his nerveless fingers. All around the room, people were staring. At her. At the power radiating from her small frame. At the impossible sight of an Omega wielding alpha strength without losing herself to it. Garrett's face twisted with horror. What are you? I'm someone who refused to break, Rowena said, and her voice carried the weight of ancient power. And I'm not the only one. She raised her voice, addressing the entire chamber. You built your world on the lie that we're weak, that we need to be controlled. But what if the bond doesn't have to destroy us? What if we could share power instead of taking it? Heresy, someone breathed. Truth, Aldrich said, lowering his sword. Through the bond, she felt his awe, his pride, his absolute certainty that she'd just changed everything. She's right. We've been using the bond wrong for generations, as a weapon, as chains, but it could be… Death! Garrett screamed and lunged. Not at Aldrich, at Rowena, his sword aimed at her heart, his face contorted with hate and fear, and the desperate need to destroy what he couldn't control. Time slowed. Rowena felt Aldrich's terror through the bond, felt him trying to reach her, but he was too far, too slow. She grabbed the fallen sword at her feet and brought it up in a clumsy arc that should never have worked, should never have been fast enough. But the bond sang between her and Aldrich, and his strength flowed through her, and her blade caught Garrett's with a scream of steel on steel. For a moment they stood locked together, her borrowed alpha strength against his natural power. His eyes widened with disbelief. You can't… I already did, she gasped and shoved him back. Garrett stumbled, lost his balance, fell. His head struck the marble floor with a sickening crack, and he went still. Silence crashed down on the chamber. Rowena stood over Garrett's unconscious body, the sword shaking in her hands, barely able to process what had just happened. Around her the fighting had stopped. Everyone was staring, at her, at Garrett, at the impossible thing they'd just witnessed, an Omega, wielding alpha power, defeating a lord in combat, and still standing, still herself, still Rowena. It's over, Aldrich said quietly, moving to her side. You can let go now. She dropped the sword like it had burned her. The borrowed power drained away, leaving her weak and shaking. But the bond remained strong and steady, connecting her to Aldrich without controlling her. Theron was the first to move, checking Garrett's pulse. He's alive. Unconscious, but alive. Lock him up, Aldrich commanded, and anyone else who raised arms against the crown. We'll deal with them properly once this is settled. His guards moved to obey. Garrett's men surrendered without a fight. Their leader defeated, their cause in ruins. The counselors slowly returned to their seats, shell-shocked and uncertain. They'd come here expecting to depose a king. Instead, they'd witnessed something that shouldn't exist. Lord Brentwood found his voice first. What was that? Evolution, Aldrich said simply. He turned to address the full council, his arm around Rowena's shoulders, supporting her, not possessing her. You wanted to know if I'm fit to rule. Here's my answer. Not if ruling means perpetuating a system that breaks people. Not if it means using the bond as a weapon instead of a gift. But the girl, she used alpha power, because I gave it to her through the bond. Willingly, equally. Aldrich's voice was firm. And she didn't lose herself. She didn't become my puppet. She remained Rowena, just stronger. That's impossible, Castor said weakly. We just watched it happen, Theron said, his voice filled with wonder. A bond of equals, sharing power instead of taking it. If this could be replicated, then everything changes, Aldrich finished. The bond doesn't have to break women. It could strengthen them, but only if given freely, without force, without coercion. Rowena felt every eye on her. She was exhausted, terrified, still shaking from the adrenaline, but she stood straight and met their stares. I still don't want it, she said clearly. The bond. Not fully. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And that has to be okay. It is okay, Aldrich said. That's the whole point. More silence. Then, slowly, Lord Brentwood stood. I withdraw my petition, he said quietly. If what we just witnessed is possible, if the bond can be reformed, then perhaps His Majesty's path is worth exploring. One by one, the other counselors who'd called for Aldrich's removal stood and withdrew their support. Not all of them, Castor and a few others remained seated, their faces hard with disapproval. But enough. Enough to let Aldrich keep his throne. Enough to let Rowena keep her freedom. "This session is adjourned," Theron announced, relief plain in his voice. "His Majesty will address the full court tomorrow with proposals for bond reform." The counselors filed out, talking in hushed, urgent voices. Within hours, the whole fortress would know what had happened. By morning, the whole kingdom would be talking about it. The girl who wielded alpha power without breaking. The king who gave strength instead of taking it. The bond that didn't destroy. Everything had changed. Rowena waited until they were alone, her, Aldrich, and Theron, before her legs finally gave out. Aldrich caught her, lowering her gently to sit on the steps of the dais. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen," he said, his voice shaking. "You could have died. So could you." She looked up at him. "Why did you give me your power? Through the bond?" "Because you needed it. Because I trust you. Because—" He stopped, searching for words. "Because I wanted to see what would happen if the bond was a partnership instead of a prison." And it was terrifying and amazing, and I have no idea what comes next." She laughed weakly. "Join the club." Theron cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, the girl should rest. She's been through—" "Rowena," she interrupted. "My name is Rowena, not the girl." "My apologies. Rowena should rest." Aldrich helped her to her feet. "Come on. I'll have the healers check you over, make sure you're all right." "I'm fine, just tired." She paused. "And I still want to leave." Pain flashed across his face, but he nodded. "I know, the offer still stands, supplies, coin, safe passage. Whenever you're ready." "Even after all that?" She gestured vaguely at the chamber, at the scene of chaos and blood and revolution. "Especially after that. You proved that the bond doesn't have to be a cage, but that means you get to choose whether to keep it or try to break it." His smile was sad. "Your choice, Rowena. Always your choice." She felt the bond between them, warm and steady, and so different from the suffocating change she'd feared. It still scared her, still represented everything she'd been running from, but maybe, just maybe, it could be something else. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think, to figure out who I am outside of all this. Can you give me that?" "As much as you need." As Aldrich led her from the chamber, neither of them saw the figure watching from the shadows of the upper gallery. One of Castor's servants, his face twisted with fanatic determination. The old order was crumbling. The sacred traditions were being destroyed. Someone had to stop it. Someone had to make the king see reason. And if that meant removing the source of his corruption, the girl who'd poisoned his mind with ideas of equality and choice, then so be it. The servant slipped away, already planning. Tonight had been chaos. Tomorrow would be worse. Because Rowena had survived the immediate danger, had proven the impossible, had changed the very foundation of the kingdom. But revolution always came with a price, and somewhere in the fortress, that price was being calculated in blood. The attack came at dawn. Rowena woke to the sound of shattering glass and rolled off the bed on pure instinct. A crossbow bolt buried itself in the pillow where her head had been seconds before, feathers exploding into the air like snow. She hit the floor hard, her shoulder slamming against stone. Pain shot through her arm, but she kept moving, crawling toward the door. Through the broken window, she could see a figure on the rooftop across the courtyard, already reloading. "Guards!" she screamed, her voice raw. The door burst open before she reached it. Cormac, sword drawn, his face pale in the pre-dawn light. "Are you hurt?" "No, but someone just tried to—" Another bolt whistled through the window. Cormac shoved her flat against the wall, and the projectile shattered against his breastplate with a sound like a bell being struck wrong. "Stay down!" He moved to the window, keeping low. "Damn it, there's at least 3 of them, professionals." Footsteps thundered in the corridor. More guards poured into the room, forming a protective wall between Rowena and the window. Through the bond, she felt Aldrich's sudden spike of alarm, sharp and cutting, like someone had driven a knife into his chest. He'd sensed her danger even from across the fortress. "Get her to the king's quarters," Cormac ordered. "Move, and someone get archers on those roofs before they reload." They hustled her through the corridors at a run, her bare feet slapping against cold stone. She was still in her nightgown, no shoes, no weapon, nothing but the guards surrounding her and the bond burning hot with Aldrich's fear. He met them halfway, half-dressed with his sword belt hanging loose, his hair wild. The moment he saw her, relief flooded through the connection so strongly it made her knees weak. What happened? His hands were on her shoulders, checking for injuries even though she'd already said she was fine. Crossbow, at least 3 shooters, maybe more. Cormac was breathing hard. Someone hired professionals, Your Majesty. This wasn't some angry drunk with a grudge. Where did they shoot from? The Eastern Wing, Lord Castor's section. Aldrich's expression went cold. Of course it was. Get her somewhere safe. Triple the guard on every entrance to my chambers. And find those assassins. I want them alive if possible. And if it's not possible, Cormac asked, then make sure they can't try again. As they moved deeper into the king's private wing, Theron appeared from a side corridor, looking like he'd dressed in a hurry. His robe was askew and he was missing a shoe. Your Majesty, we have a situation. Lord Castor has barricaded himself and his supporters in the Eastern Wing. At least 20 armed men, maybe more. They're calling this an illegal coup and demanding you step down immediately. Aldrich's laugh was sharp and humorless. Of course they are. Because attempting to murder a woman in her sleep is so much more honorable than trying to reform a broken system. They're saying you've been corrupted, that the bond has driven you mad. Theron limped alongside them, favoring his shoeless foot. Half the court is terrified of what they saw last night. The other half is already figuring out how to profit from it. Then we need to give them clarity. Show them this isn't madness or corruption. It's evolution. Aldrich glanced at Rowena. I know you need time. I know you want space to think. But if we can demonstrate what happened in front of witnesses, they might stop trying to kill me long enough to actually listen. She tried for sarcasm, but it came out shaky. Through the bond, she felt his guilt like acid. He wanted to protect her from all of this, wanted to fix it without asking more of her, but they both knew there was no other way forward. What do you need? She asked. They gathered in Aldrich's study, him, Rowena, Theron, and Cormac. Maps were spread across the desk, but nobody was looking at them. We call an assembly, Aldrich said. Not just the council. Everyone. Nobles, guards, servants, the bonded women too, especially them. We show them what the bond can be when it's not forced. And if Castor refuses to attend? Theron asked. Then he's in open rebellion, and we deal with him accordingly. Aldrich's voice was flat. I'm done negotiating with men who'd rather commit murder than accept change. The court will expect you to execute him if he doesn't surrender, Theron said carefully. The old laws are clear about armed insurrection. The old laws are what got us into this mess. Aldrich rubbed his face. But yes, if it comes to that, I'll do what's necessary. Rowena felt his reluctance through the bond. Not weakness, but the weight of responsibility. He didn't want to kill Castor. He just wanted the old man to stop fighting long enough to see that the world was changing whether he liked it or not. When? She asked. Noon. Gives us time to prepare, time to get word out. Aldrich looked at her. You don't have to do this. I can handle the assembly alone. No. She straightened her shoulders. If I hide now, they'll say I'm afraid. That what happened last night was a fluke or manipulation. I need to be there. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Cormac coughed. Your Majesty, the lady needs proper clothing, and maybe shoes. Despite everything, Rowena almost smiled. That would help. They found her a dress that had belonged to Aldrich's mother, deep blue silk with silver embroidery at the cuffs. It was too long, but a servant hastily hemmed it while Rowena tried not to think about the crossbow bolts or the men who wanted her dead. Mari appeared as they were finishing, moving with more purpose than Rowena had seen in years. The older woman's eyes were clearer, more focused, though she still had that careful quality of someone relearning how to be themselves. I heard what happened, Mari said. I heard they tried to kill you. Word travels fast. The whole fortress is talking. Half of them are horrified. The other half... Mari's mouth thinned. The other half are saying you deserve it for disrupting the natural order. Rowena's hands curled into fists. The natural order is a lie we've been telling ourselves for generations. I know. I'm starting to remember that now. Mari moved closer, lowering her voice. There are others like me. Women whose bonds are loosening. We can feel it. Little cracks in the walls that kept us compliant. And we want to help. Help how? By standing with you at the assembly. By showing the court that we're not mindless dolls who exist only to please our alphas. that we can think, can choose, can be ourselves again. Mari's smile was tremulous but real. If there's a chance, even a small one, that more of us can find our way back, we need to fight for it. Rowena felt something tighten in her chest. Mari, if you speak out, they might target you too. Your mate, Torsten, supports this. He's horrified by what the bond did to me, what he did to me without even realizing. Mari took her hand. Please, let us help. You've already done so much. Let someone else carry part of the weight. Before Rowena could answer, Aldrich returned, now fully dressed in formal robes that made him look every inch a king. He took one look at Mari and seemed to understand. You want to testify, he said. I want to show them what's possible. If that means testifying, yes. Aldrich nodded slowly. Then you'll stand with us. Both of you. The assembly gathered at noon, and the great hall was packed beyond capacity. Nobles stood shoulder to shoulder with servants. Guards lined the walls. And scattered throughout the crowd were bonded women, many of them looking confused and uncertain. A few with that same awakening awareness Mari had. Rowena stood beside Aldrich on the dais, her hand in his, trying not to think about how many people were staring. The bond hummed between them, warm and steady, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this. People of Blackstone Keep, Aldrich began, his voice carrying easily through the space. You've heard rumors about what happened in the council chamber last night, about impossible power, about bonds that don't break, about a servant girl who faced down a lord and lived. I'm here to tell you those rumors don't even scratch the surface of the truth. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some hostile, some curious, some openly afraid. For generations, we've used the mating bond as a weapon. We've forced it on women without their consent, broken their wills, and called it destiny. We've told ourselves it was natural, that it was right, that it was the only way to maintain order. He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd. We were wrong, and it's time we admitted it. Heresy, someone shouted from the back. Truth, Aldrich countered, and I can prove it. Rowena, if you're willing. She stepped forward, her throat tight with fear. Every eye in the room was on her, judging, weighing, trying to decide if she was a revolutionary or a threat. The bond doesn't have to destroy, she said, forcing her voice to stay level. It can strengthen. It can connect. But only if given freely, without force, without the expectation that one person will dominate and the other will disappear. Then show us, called a voice. Lord Brentwood, who'd withdrawn his petition against Aldrich but still looked skeptical. If this is real, if it's not some trick or corruption, demonstrate it. Aldrich looked at her, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded. They'd practiced this morning, tentatively exploring what the bond could do when both of them were willing. Now, in front of hundreds of witnesses, they did it again. Aldrich opened the connection between them fully, and Rowena felt his power flowing through like warm honey. But this time, instead of just taking it, she met it with her own will. Not fighting, not resisting, joining, like two streams coming together to form something stronger than either could be alone. The bond flared gold, visible to everyone in the room. Gasps echoed through the hall. But unlike last night's desperate burst of survival instinct, this was controlled, deliberate. A demonstration of what partnership could look like when both people chose it. Through the connection, Rowena felt Aldrich's memories washing over her, his childhood lessons in dominance, his first witnessed bonding ceremony where he'd watched a woman's eyes go dead, his slow-growing horror as he realized what the system truly was. She let him feel hers in return, scrubbing blood from floors, watching Alara scream, the desperate certainty that death was better than breaking. And something else, something newer, respect, recognition, the fragile beginning of trust. The golden light spread to encompass them both, and Rowena felt power settle into her bones like it belonged there. She was still herself, still angry, still scared, still Rowena, but stronger, more complete. When the light faded, she was breathing hard but standing tall. The hall was utterly silent. Then Mari stepped forward from the crowd, Torsten beside her. Her mate looked nervous, but he didn't try to stop her. I want to try, Mari said clearly. If there's a chance, even a small chance, that I could feel like myself again, I want to try. Torsten's face went pale. Mari, our bond has been complete for 15 years. We can't just... We can try. She turned to him, and real emotion flickered across her face. Please, I can feel something changing, something loosening in the bond. Maybe if we both want it, I don't understand. The bond makes you happy. You've never complained. Because I couldn't, Mari said, and her voice cracked. The bond took away my ability to want anything except what you wanted. But watching Rowena stay herself despite everything, something in me woke up. I started remembering what it felt like to choose. She held out her hand to him. Choose me again. Not as a possession, but as a person. Let me choose you back. Torsten stared at her hand for a long moment. Rowena could see the conflict in his face, fear of change, the comfort of familiar patterns, against something that looked uncomfortably like guilt. You were different, he said quietly. Before the bond. Louder, angrier, more alive. I told myself the bond had just smoothed your rough edges, made you calmer, happier. But that was a lie, wasn't it? Yes. I took you from yourself. His voice was thick, and I didn't even notice. So help me find my way back. He took her hand, his grip trembling. What happened next wasn't dramatic. No golden light, no visible surge of power. But Rowena felt it through her connection to Aldrich, felt the way the bond between Mari and Torsten shifted, not breaking, but loosening, making room for two wills instead of one. Mari gasped, her eyes going wide. And for the first time in 15 years, they truly focused. Elise, she whispered. My daughter's name was Elise. She died of fever when she was 6, and she loved yellow flowers, and her laugh sounded like bells. Tears streamed down her face, real tears, not the empty crying of someone whose emotions had been muffled by the bond. She was remembering, coming back to herself piece by painful piece. She had your stubbornness, Torsten said, his own voice breaking, and your terrible singing voice. You used to make up songs about everything, washing dishes, feeding chickens, watching the rain. I remember. Mari's voice was full of wonder and grief. I remember all of it. I remember me. The hall erupted in noise, some people cheering, others shouting in denial or anger, still more simply staring in shock. More bonded women were pushing forward now, their mates beside them or being dragged along, all of them asking if it was possible, if they could try, if they could find themselves again. Aldrich raised his hand for silence, and gradually the noise died down. This is what I'm proposing, he said, his voice ringing clear. A complete reformation of how we approach the bond. No more forced claims. No more expecting women to disappear into their mates' desires. Any alpha who wants to bond must first gain genuine consent, not coerced, not pressured, but freely given. And once bonded, both parties must work to maintain balance, to share power instead of one taking it all. That's insanity, someone shouted. The natural order, Aldrich interrupted, his voice cutting, has been enslaving half our population for generations, and I'm done pretending that's acceptable. And if we refuse, Lord Castor's voice carried from the back of the hall. He'd emerged from the eastern wing, flanked by armed men, his face twisted with contempt. If we choose to uphold the traditions of our ancestors instead of this corrupted mockery, then you're free to leave, Aldrich said flatly. I won't force anyone to accept these changes, but I also won't allow anyone to force bonds on unwilling participants. Not anymore. Not ever again. Castor's face went purple with rage. You'd destroy everything our fathers built for one serving girl? I'd rebuild our society into something better, Aldrich corrected, for everyone, not just the men who benefit from control. Then you're no king of mine. Castor drew his sword, the steel ringing in the sudden silence. I challenge your right to rule. Trial by combat, as is my right under the old laws you claim to honor. The hall went deathly quiet. Trial by combat was ancient, rarely invoked, but legally binding. If Castor won, he could claim the throne and undo everything. And he was a renowned fighter, older, yes, but with decades of battle experience. Aldrich was young, barely 30, and had spent more time governing than training with a blade. Theron moved forward quickly. Your Majesty, you don't have to accept. The old laws also allow you to name a champion to fight in your stead. No. Aldrich's voice was firm. If I'm going to tear down the old order and build something new, I need to prove I'm strong enough to defend it myself. He looked at Castor across the crowd. I accept your challenge. Name your terms. Castor's smile was vicious. To the death or surrender. Winner takes the throne and decides the fate of your pet Omega. Through the bond, Rowena felt Aldrich's fear. Not for himself, but for her. If he lost, if Castor won, she'd be dead within the hour. Probably after they forced her to watch what happened to Mari and the other women who'd spoken up. Agreed, Aldrich said calmly. When do you want to do this? Now. Unless you need time to make peace with your fate. I just need a proper sword. Aldrich turned to one of the guards. Fetch my father's blade from the armory. As they waited, Rowena grabbed his arm. You don't have to do this. Let Cormac fight for you. Or, if I let someone else fight this battle, it undermines everything we're trying to prove. His hand covered hers. That the new way is worth defending. That I'm committed to it enough to risk everything. You could die. I could. But I won't. He smiled, trying for confident and landing somewhere around terrified. I have an advantage Castor doesn't. What? You. Before she could ask what he meant, the guard returned with the sword, a beautiful blade with a worn leather grip, clearly well used and well loved. They cleared a space in the center of the hall, and the crowd pressed back against the walls. Rowena found herself at the edge of the circle, Cormac on one side and Mari on the other, both of them looking as sick with worry as she felt. If Aldrich falls, Mari whispered, run. Don't wait. Don't look back. Just run. I won't leave him. Then you'll die too, and everything he's fighting for dies with you. Mari's grip on her arm was tight. Promise me, if he loses, you run. Rowena couldn't make that promise, but she nodded anyway because Mari needed to see it. The duel began without ceremony. Castor attacked immediately, his blade moving with the deadly precision of a lifetime of training. He was older, but age had only sharpened his skills, made his movements economical and brutal. Aldrich met him blow for blow, but Rowena could see the difference in their styles. Castor fought like a predator, patient, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Aldrich fought like someone who'd learned the forms but never really expected to use them in a battle to the death. Steel rang against steel, sharp and bright. The crowd watched in tense silence, barely breathing. Through the bond, Rowena felt every impact shudder through Aldrich's body, felt his arms straining to keep up with Castor's relentless assault, felt his fear growing as he realized just how outmatched he was. 5 minutes became 10. Both men were bleeding now, Castor from a gash across his shoulder, Aldrich from a deep cut on his sword arm. Their breathing was harsh and ragged. Just surrender, Castor panted, circling. Admit you were wrong. Step down, and I'll make your death quick. Maybe even let the girl live in a cell somewhere. I was wrong about a lot of things, Aldrich said, his voice tight. But not about this. Not about her. Not about any of it. He lunged, and their swords clashed again. The sound echoed through the hall like thunder. Rowena couldn't watch and couldn't look away. Through the bond, she felt Aldrich's strength flagging, felt the cut on his arm bleeding badly, felt his desperate determination to protect her even as his body betrayed him. And suddenly, she understood what he'd meant, what his advantage was. She reached through the bond not to take his power like she had in the council chamber, but to give him hers. All her rage at the system that had tried to break her, all her determination to survive, all her desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something better together. She poured it through the connection like fire. Aldrich's eyes flashed gold. His next strike came faster, harder, driving Castor back a step. The old lord's confident smile faltered, replaced by confusion. What? How are you? Partnership, Aldrich gritted out, pressing his advantage. Equals. That's what you'll never understand, Castor. Power isn't something to hoard. It's something to share. Their blades locked, and for a moment they stood face to face, straining against each other. The old ways kept us strong, Castor hissed. Your new way will destroy us. The old ways were already destroying us. We just didn't want to see it. Castor tried to pull back, to reset his stance, but Aldrich was ready. He twisted his blade in a move Rowena had never seen, stepped inside Castor's guard, and suddenly his sword was at the old lord's throat. Yield, Aldrich commanded. Castor's face was pure hatred. Blood ran from his shoulder wound, dripping onto the marble floor. Kill me. I won't live in your corrupted kingdom where women think they're people. They are people, Aldrich said quietly. They always were. We just taught ourselves not to see it. His blade pressed harder against Castor's throat, drawing a thin line of blood. Last chance. Yield or die. The hall held its breath. Then slowly, Castor's sword clattered to the floor. I yield, he said, the words forced through clenched teeth. But this isn't over. Mark my words, boy. There will always be men who remember the true way, who refuse to let your corruption spread. Then they'll have to learn to be disappointed. Aldrich stepped back, lowering his blade. Take him to the cells. He'll stand trial for rebellion and attempted murder. As the guards moved forward to seize Castor, the hall erupted. Not entirely in cheers, there were still plenty of people who looked horrified by what had just happened. But enough people were celebrating, enough voices raised in support to show that change was actually possible. Aldrich turned toward Rowena, and through the bond she felt his exhaustion crash over him like a wave. She ran to him, not caring about propriety or appearances, and caught him as his knees buckled. I've got you, she said. We've got each other, he corrected, leaning heavily on her. Blood was still seeping from the cut on his arm. That's the whole point, isn't it? Around them, chaos reigned. People were arguing, celebrating, trying to process what they'd witnessed. But in the center of it all, Rowena and Aldrich stood together, bloodied and exhausted, but somehow still upright. Mari approached with Torsten, both of them looking shaken, but more present than Rowena had ever seen them. Thank you, Mari said simply, for showing us it was possible. Thank Aldrich, Rowena said. He's the one willing to fight for it. We both fought, Aldrich said tiredly. That's the new way. Both of us, together, or not at all. More bonded pairs were approaching now, asking questions about how to reshape their bonds. And scattered among them were unbonded women, their eyes bright with the realization that they might actually have choices, might actually get to decide their own futures. Theron appeared at Aldrich's elbow, looking harried. Your Majesty, the healers are demanding to see to your wounds, and we need to make a formal announcement. There are still nobles who refuse to accept this, who are talking about leaving the kingdom entirely. Let them leave, Aldrich said, swaying slightly. Anyone who can't accept that women are people can build their own kingdom somewhere else. See how that works out for them. And the bond reformation laws? Draft them tonight. We'll present them to the council tomorrow. Aldrich's voice was getting weaker. No more forced bonds, no more breaking. Consent required, partnership expected, or the bond doesn't happen at all. That's going to cause chaos, Your Majesty. Good. We could use some chaos. The order we had was killing us. The healers finally pulled Aldrich away, and Rowena found herself surrounded by women, servants, nobles, bonded and unbonded alike, all of them looking at her with expressions ranging from hope to desperation. Is it real? One of them asked, a young servant not much older than Rowena herself. Can we actually say no? Can we choose? It's real, Rowena said. And if you're already bonded, you can work to change it. Make it something mutual. But what if our mates refuse? What if they like us better broken? Rowena thought about her desperate run through the fortress, about the terror of the partial bond trying to consume her, about Aldrich's promise that her choice would always matter. Then you fight, she said. You stand your ground and demand to be treated like a person. And if they still refuse, if they can't see you as anything but property, she paused. Then they never deserved you in the first place. The women looked at each other, and Rowena saw something spreading among them like fire catching dry grass. Not rebellion exactly, but awareness. Understanding that they had value, had rights, had power they'd never been allowed to use. It was a beginning. Over the next 3 days, the fortress transformed in ways both beautiful and terrible. Aldrich issued formal decrees outlining the new bond laws, consent required, partnership expected, forced claims punishable by exile or death depending on severity. The council fought him on every word, every clause, but he had just enough support now to force it through. More importantly, the bonded pairs began the slow, painful work of reshaping their relationships. Some succeeded, finding balance and genuine affection they'd never known was possible. Others failed, the alphas too addicted to control to let it go, the women too damaged by years of erasure to trust that change was real. But more succeeded than failed. And that was enough. Rowena spent her time helping where she could, talking to frightened women, demonstrating the shared bond with Aldrich for those who needed proof, slowly learning to navigate her new role as someone whose words actually mattered. She still planned to leave eventually, still wanted time and space to figure out who she was outside of revolution and danger. But the urgency had faded. The assassins had been caught and executed. Castor was awaiting trial. The immediate threats had passed. And if she was honest, part of her wanted to see how this all turned out. A week after the duel, Aldrich found her in the gardens at sunset. "You're still here," he said, sitting beside her on a stone bench. "I'm still here. I thought you'd be halfway to the border by now. I thought about it." She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "But then I realized, I spent so long running from the bond, from this place, from everything that might trap me. But what I'm running toward matters too." "And what are you running toward?" "I don't know yet. That's what scares me." She looked at him. "I know I want freedom. I know I want to be myself. But I also want purpose. Want to feel like my existence means something." "It does mean something," Aldrich said quietly. "You changed everything, gave hope to people who'd forgotten what hope felt like." "But we changed it, together." She hesitated. "The bond is still incomplete. Does it bother you?" "Sometimes. It pulls at me, makes me want to finish it." He was quiet for a moment. "But I meant what I said. Your choice, always." "What if I wanted to try?" The word surprised her. "Not complete it fully, but explore what it could be. See if we can build something real." Hope flared in his eyes, quickly tempered by caution. "Are you sure? There's no pressure." "I know. That's why I can actually consider it." She took his hand. "I'm not ready for forever. Maybe I never will be. But I am ready to see what this could become, if we both choose it." "Together," he said softly. "Together," she agreed. They sat in silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Through the bond, Rowena felt Aldrich's quiet joy, his determination to prove worthy of her trust. And she felt her own emotions in return, still uncertain, still a little afraid, but also something new. Hope. The revolution wasn't over. There were still lords who resisted, still women too broken to heal, still countless battles ahead. But for the first time since that night when she'd watched Alara scream, Rowena felt like the future might hold something other than fear. It might hold possibility. She leaned against Aldrich's shoulder, letting herself rest, and through the bond they sat together as equals. Two people choosing each other, one careful day at a time. In the fortress below, women who'd forgotten how to hope were remembering. The girl who'd refused to break had shown them that breaking wasn't inevitable, that strength could be shared, that the future could be different if enough people demanded it, and the revolution burned brighter every day. And the revolution burned brighter every day. Until it didn't. 3 weeks after the duel, the resistance struck back. Rowena was in the lower courtyard helping Mari teach a group of newly unbonded women basic self-defense when the explosion ripped through the eastern tower. The blast shook the ground beneath her feet, sent stone and dust raining down from the walls. "Get down!" Mari screamed, throwing herself over one of the younger women. Rowena hit the ground as debris pelted the courtyard. Through the bond, she felt Aldrich's instant alarm. He was in a council meeting on the other side of the fortress, too far away to help. The dust cleared slowly. Where the eastern tower had stood, there was now a gaping hole, flames licking up the broken walls. And through the smoke came armed men, at least 40 of them, wearing no colors, no insignia, nothing to identify who'd sent them. But Rowena knew. She'd seen some of these faces in Castor's entourage before his arrest. "Rebels," she said, scrambling to her feet. "Everyone, run! Get to the main hall!" The women scattered, most of them making it to cover, but 3 of the attackers broke off from the main group, heading straight for Rowena with grim determination. She didn't have a weapon, didn't have time to call for help. All she had was the bond and whatever scraps of borrowed power she could pull through it. The first man swung a club at her head. She ducked, felt it whistle past her ear, and drove her fist into his stomach with strength that wasn't entirely hers. He folded with a grunt. The second one grabbed her from behind, pinning her arms. She threw her head back, connected with his nose, heard it crunch. His grip loosened just enough for her to twist free. The third man was smarter. He didn't try to fight her hand to hand, he just pulled a knife and lunged. Rowena saw the blade coming and knew she wouldn't be fast enough. The bond screamed in her chest, Aldrich's terror flooding through it, but he was still too far away. Steel met steel with a ringing clash. Cormac appeared between her and the knife, his sword knocking the blade aside. "Get behind me!" More guards were pouring into the courtyard now, engaging the rebels. The fighting was brutal and close. No room for finesse, just desperate survival. Rowena pressed herself against the wall, trying to stay out of the way while also scanning for Mari and the other women. She spotted Mari dragging an injured girl toward cover, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead, but her eyes fierce and aware, alive, still herself. "Rowena!" Aldrich's voice cut through the chaos. He was running toward her, sword drawn, his face pale with fear. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. Mari's injured and there are women scattered. I'll get them. You need to get somewhere safe." "There is nowhere safe." She grabbed his arm. "They blew up a tower, Aldrich. They're not here to make a statement. They're here to burn everything down." Through the bond, she felt his fury mixing with his fear. He wanted to protect her, wanted to lock her away somewhere the rebels couldn't reach. But they both knew that wasn't possible anymore. She was too visible, too symbolic of everything the old guard wanted to destroy. "Then we fight," he said grimly. "Together." The battle raged through the fortress for hours. The rebels had clearly planned this, coordinating their attack with sympathizers inside the walls. They'd freed Castor from the dungeons. His body was found later in the wreckage of his cell, killed by falling stone when they'd blown the charges too close. Whether they'd meant to rescue him or silence him, no one would ever know. By sunset, it was over. The rebels who survived had surrendered or fled. The casualties were devastating. 14 guards dead, 8 servants, 3 nobles who'd been caught in the initial blast. And among the injured, too many to count. Rowena found Aldrich in the Great Hall, which had been converted into a makeshift hospital. He was helping the healers move the wounded, his formal robes abandoned, his shirt sleeves rolled up and stained with blood. "We need more bandages," a healer was saying. "And water, clean water, not from the cistern near the tower. It might be contaminated." "I'll send someone," Aldrich said. He looked exhausted, older than his 30 years. When he saw Rowena, relief flickered across his face. "You're all right." "Relatively speaking." She moved to help, kneeling beside a woman whose leg had been crushed by falling stone. "How many did we lose?" "Too many." His voice was flat. "And Theron is saying we need to retaliate, round up anyone suspected of rebel sympathies and make examples of them." "Don't." She looked up at him. "That's exactly what they want. More violence, more fear, more proof that change is dangerous. But if we don't respond with strength, we respond with truth." She stood, wiping her hands on her already ruined dress. "We show everyone what this attack really was. Desperate men trying to preserve a system that was killing people long before we tried to change it. And how do we do that?" She thought about Mari remembering her daughter, about the women learning to choose, about Aldrich standing in front of the council and admitting the old ways were broken. "We finish what we started," she said. "We don't just reform the bond. We give people real alternatives, real choices about how they want to live." Over the next month, they built something new. Not a replacement for the bond. Rowena was adamant about that. The bond could be beautiful when chosen freely, when both people wanted it, but it couldn't be the only option, the only path to security or status or belonging. So they created new laws. Women could own property now, could inherit, could enter professions previously closed to them. The bond was still available for those who wanted it, but it wasn't mandatory, wasn't expected, wasn't the only way to build a life. The resistance didn't disappear. There were still nobles who left the kingdom entirely, taking their families to the outer territories where they tried to maintain the old ways. There were still men who grumbled about the natural order, still women too damaged by their bonds to fully recover. But slowly, painfully, the culture began to shift. Rowena stood before the full council 6 weeks after the attack, no longer a servant or a symbol, but a formal advisor to the crown. The title still felt strange, but she was learning to wear it. "The petition before you," she said, her voice steady despite the dozens of eyes watching her, "is from the Women's Guild in the lower city. They're asking for permission to establish a shelter for those escaping abusive bonds." Lord Brentwood frowned. "A shelter? You mean a place where women can abandon their mates?" "I mean a place where women being hurt can find safety while they decide what they want to do next." She met his eyes. "The new bond laws allow for dissolution in cases of abuse. But that's only theoretical if there's nowhere safe to go while the legal process unfolds. This will encourage women to make false claims, another counselor argued, to abandon perfectly good bonds just because they're inconvenient. Then we investigate those claims. But we don't deny protection to real victims just because we're afraid of imaginary ones. The debate went on for another hour, but in the end, the council approved the petition. Not unanimously, it never was, but by enough votes to matter. Small victories. They were all small victories, each one requiring endless negotiation and compromise, but they added up. Aldrich found her afterward in the gardens, their usual meeting place as the sun set. "You were brilliant in there, T," he said, sitting beside her. "I was adequate. Brentwood still thinks I'm going to single-handedly destroy civilization. Give it time." He thought the same thing about letting women own property, and now his own daughter is petitioning to buy a shop in the merchant quarter. Rowena smiled despite herself. "How is the bond reformation census going?" "Slowly. We've had about 300 bonded pairs voluntarily register for the restructuring program. About half report positive results. They're finding ways to balance the connection. The other half," he trailed off, "the other half are discovering that their mates don't actually want partners. They want possessions." "Yes," his voice was heavy, "and those bonds are being dissolved, which is causing its own problems." Such as? Such as men who thought their power came from controlling women, discovering they have to actually earn respect now. He ran a hand through his hair. 3 more nobles left for the territories last week, and there's talk of them forming their own kingdom, maintaining the old bond laws. "Let them," Rowena leaned against his shoulder. "Let them build their regressive little kingdom and see how long it lasts without any women willing to participate." Through the bond, she felt his amusement mixing with his exhaustion. They'd grown closer over the past weeks, the connection between them deepening without consuming. She could feel his emotions, could share power with him, but she was still absolutely herself. It was strange and wonderful and terrifying in equal measure. "I have something to tell you," she said quietly, "and I don't know if you'll understand. Try me. I think I want to leave. Not forever. Just for a while." She turned to face him. "There are other kingdoms, other places where the bond system is even worse than it was here, and I keep thinking, if we could change things in Blackstone, maybe other places could change too. If someone showed them it was possible." She expected him to be hurt, to feel abandoned. Instead, through the bond, she felt understanding. "You want to spread the revolution," he said. "Is that insane? Probably. But most worthwhile things are." He took her hand. "How long?" "I don't know. 6 months? A year? However long it takes to plant some seeds, to show people there's another way." "And you'll come back?" She smiled. "The bond goes both ways now, remember? I couldn't stay away permanently even if I wanted to, which I don't." "Then go." He kissed her forehead. "Go show the world what's possible. Just be careful. And let me know if you need anything. Money, supplies, an army. I'll start with money and supplies. If I need an army, we're probably doing it wrong." They sat together as the stars came out, 2 people connected by choice rather than compulsion, planning a future neither of them could have imagined months ago. 3 months later, Rowena stood in the capital city of Moran, a kingdom 3 weeks' travel from Blackstone, and watched another bonding ceremony. The woman on the dais was screaming, just like Alara had screamed, as the bond wrapped around her and began erasing who she was. Rowena's hands clenched into fists, but she didn't look away. She made herself watch, made herself remember why she was here. When it was over, when the woman stood hollow and adoring beside her new mate, Rowena approached the Queen of Meran. She was an older woman, bonded decades ago, who ruled beside her king with the careful emptiness of someone who'd forgotten how to want anything he didn't want first. "Your Majesty," Rowena said, bowing as protocol demanded. "I bring greetings from King Aldrich of Blackstone Keep." The Queen's eyes were distant. "Blackstone? I've heard rumors about that kingdom. They say you've corrupted the sacred bond. We've reformed it, made it something chosen rather than forced." "That's impossible." "It's not, and I can prove it." Rowena straightened. "Give me 1 week. Let me speak to your bonded women, show them what's possible. If after that they still prefer the old way, I'll leave and never return." The queen studied her with those dead eyes, but somewhere deep in them something flickered. Curiosity, maybe, or hope. "1 week," she said finally, "but you'll be watched. Any sign of sedition and you'll be arrested." "Understood." It took 3 days to gather the women, another 2 to convince them that what she was saying wasn't a trap or a test. But on the 6th day, in a hidden room in the lower city, Rowena demonstrated the shared bond with a volunteer, a woman whose mate had agreed to try, desperate to see his wife smile with her whole face again. When it worked, when the woman's eyes cleared with real awareness for the first time in 8 years, the room erupted in chaos. Not all of it good. Some of the women were terrified, convinced they'd be punished for even witnessing this. Others were angry, mourning the years they'd lost to forced compliance. But some, enough, looked at Rowena with the same desperate hope she'd seen in Marie's eyes. "How?" one of them asked. "How do we make this happen here? You talk to your mates. You demand to be treated as people, not possessions. And if they refuse—" Rowena paused. "You decide what your freedom is worth, and you fight for it." The revolution in Marin was slower than in Blackstone, more cautious, but it started. And once it started, it spread. Rowena moved from kingdom to kingdom, always careful, always watched, planting seeds of change wherever she went. Some places embraced it immediately. Others rejected it violently. She barely escaped Korvath with her life after attempting to speak at a public gathering. But everywhere she went, women whispered her name. The girl who'd refused to break. The one who'd shown them that breaking wasn't inevitable. She wrote to Aldrich regularly, long letters describing her travels, her successes, and failures. He wrote back with news from Blackstone. The bond reformation was holding, though not without problems. Mari had become the head of the Women's Guild, advocating fiercely for those still trapped in abusive bonds. Several nobles had returned from the territories, their experiment in maintaining the old ways having failed spectacularly when their daughters refused to participate. And slowly, other kingdoms were reaching out, asking questions, sending diplomats to observe Blackstone's changes firsthand. The world was changing. Not quickly, not easily, but undeniably. A year after she'd left, Rowena returned to Blackstone Keep. Aldrich met her at the gates, and the moment she saw him, the bond flared warm and bright between them. She'd felt it throughout her travels, that constant connection, but having him physically present was different, better. "You look terrible," he said, grinning. "You look worse." She did too, thinner, harder, with scars from fights she'd barely won. "How's the kingdom?" "Still standing, mostly." He pulled her into an embrace, and she felt his relief through the bond. How was saving the world? Exhausting, terrifying, absolutely necessary. She stepped back to look at him properly. "I have so much to tell you, and I want to hear all of it. But first," he gestured toward the fortress, "there are some people who want to see you." The great hall was packed with familiar faces. Mari and Torsten, their bond now balanced and healthy, their relationship rebuilt on actual partnership. Cormac, who'd been promoted to captain of the guard. Lena, who'd chosen not to bond at all and was now apprenticing with the royal healers. And dozens of women, bonded and unbonded, noble and common, who'd been part of the revolution from the beginning. "Welcome home," Mari said, stepping forward. "We've missed you." "I've missed you too." Rowena's throat was tight. "How are things here?" "Better. Not perfect. We're still getting resistance from some of the older families, and there are ongoing disputes about property rights and inheritance laws. But better." The Bond Reformation program hit 500 voluntary participants last month, Lena added. And only 12 have chosen to dissolve their bonds entirely. The rest are finding ways to make it work. That's... Rowena couldn't quite process the numbers. "That's incredible." "It's what you started," Aldrich said quietly. "What we all kept building together." That night, after the celebration wound down, Rowena and Aldrich found their way back to the gardens. Their place, their tradition. "So," he said, taking her hand, "are you staying this time?" "For a while. There's still work to do elsewhere, but..." She squeezed his fingers. "I think the revolution can survive without me constantly fanning the flames. Other people are carrying it forward now." "Good, because I have a proposal." Her heart jumped. What kind of proposal? The council wants to formalize your position, make you an official advisor with actual legislative authority. He watched her carefully. You'd have real power to shape policy, to continue pushing for reform, but you'd also have to deal with endless meetings and bureaucratic nonsense. Sounds thrilling, doesn't it? He was smiling. But there's another part. They want us to complete the bond. Officially. Make our partnership formal in the eyes of the court. Rowena went still. And what do you want? I want whatever you want. If you'd rather keep things as they are, that's fine. If you want to complete the bond, that's fine too. If you want to run away to the mountains and never deal with politics again, I'll help you pack. She thought about the past year. The loneliness of traveling alone balanced against the freedom of making her own choices. The bond stretching between them across hundreds of miles, a constant reminder that she wasn't truly alone even when she was physically isolated. And she thought about the future. The work still to be done, the battles still to fight, the slow, grinding effort of turning revolution into lasting change. She didn't want to do it alone. I want to complete the bond, she said. But on our terms. Not the old way, where one person dominates and the other disappears. Our way. Equals. Partners. Always, he promised. The ceremony was nothing like the ones Rowena had watched in horror as a servant. There was no forcing, no breaking, no screaming, just two people standing before witnesses, opening themselves fully to each other and choosing to connect. When the bond completed, Rowena felt Aldrich's presence settle into her soul like a missing piece sliding into place. But she was still herself, still angry, still determined, still absolutely Rowena. Just not alone anymore. Through the bond, she felt his joy, his relief, his absolute certainty that this was right. And she felt her own emotions mirrored back, fear and hope and love all tangled together. How do you feel? He asked afterward. Terrified. Happy. Like I just made either the best or worst decision of my life. Probably both. He kissed her, and through the bond she felt everything he couldn't put into words. But we'll figure it out together. Together, she agreed. The revolution continued, but it was no longer just Rowena's or Aldrich's. It belonged to everyone who'd chosen to fight for it. To Mari and the Women's Guild. To the guards who protected unbonded women. To the nobles who'd returned from the territories with newfound respect for their daughters. To every person who decided that the old way of doing things wasn't good enough anymore. 5 years later, Rowena stood before an assembly of delegates from 12 kingdoms, all of them grappling with their own bond reformations. Some were further along than others. Some were still fighting conservative factions that wanted to return to forced compliance. But they were all trying, and that was what mattered. The question you're all asking, she said, her voice carrying through the hall, is how do we maintain order if we give people freedom? How do we preserve society if we let women choose their own paths? How do we ensure stability when everything is changing? She paused, looking at the faces watching her. Some skeptical, some hopeful, all of them uncertain. And my answer is this. The order you're trying to maintain was built on breaking half your population. It was built on erasing women's will and calling it harmony. That's not order. That's oppression. And any system built on oppression will eventually collapse, either violently or from the inside as people realize they have other options. But without the bond as social structure, someone argued, how do we organize society? The same way every other aspect of society is organized, through laws that apply to everyone equally, through opportunities based on merit rather than gender, through relationships built on genuine affection rather than magical compulsion. She smiled. It's not actually that complicated. We've just convinced ourselves it is because change is scary. And the sacred nature of the bond? A priestess asked. Are we simply abandoning that? No, we're reclaiming it. Rowena's voice softened. The bond can be sacred when it's chosen freely. When both people want it, when it enhances rather than erases, then it's beautiful. But it can't be sacred when it's forced. Nothing can be sacred when it's taken without consent. The assembly debated for 3 more days, but in the end, they ratified the treaty. The Bond Reform Accord, they called it. Not perfect, not comprehensive, but a framework. A promise that the signatory kingdoms would work towards systems where bonds were optional, where women had legal rights, where force and coercion were punished rather than rewarded. It was a beginning. That night, Aldrich found Rowena on the balcony of their quarters, staring out at the city lights below. "How are you feeling?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Like we actually did it. Like we changed the world." "You changed the world. I just helped. We changed it together." She leaned back against him, feeling the bond hum contentedly between them. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing reform over tradition? Every time I see a woman smile with her whole face for the first time in years, I know we made the right choice." He kissed the top of her head. "Do you regret it? Staying instead of running?" "I still run sometimes, just in different directions now." "Fair enough." They stood together in comfortable silence, two people who'd fought impossible odds and somehow won. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough to matter. Below them, the city was alive with possibility. Women walked freely in the streets, running businesses, attending universities, making choices about their own lives. Some were bonded, some weren't. Some would choose the bond eventually, others never would. And that was okay. That was the whole point. Rowena had spent her life watching women lose themselves to the bond, had run from it herself, had fought it, had nearly died trying to escape it. But in the end, she'd done something better. She'd transformed it. Shown that connection didn't have to mean consumption, that partnership didn't require one person to disappear. The girl who'd refused to break had proven that breaking wasn't the only option, that strength could be shared without being stolen, that love could exist without domination, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stand your ground and demand to be treated like a person. The revolution wasn't finished. It probably never would be. There would always be those who clung to the old ways, who mourned the power they'd lost, who tried to drag society backward. But there would also be people like Mari, like Cormac, like the thousands of women and men who'd chosen to build something better. And as long as they kept choosing, kept fighting, kept believing that people deserved freedom and dignity and the right to shape their own destinies, the revolution would continue. Not as Rowena's revolution anymore, as everyone's. "Come on," Aldrich said, tugging her toward the door. "The council wants to discuss the implementation timeline for the treaty provisions. Now, it's midnight. Politics doesn't sleep. Politics needs better hobbies." But she followed him anyway, their hands linked, the bond between them warm and steady. Two people who'd chosen each other, who kept choosing each other, building a future where everyone would have that same freedom to choose. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And sometimes, real was better than any fairy tale could ever be. The girl who'd once been nothing but a servant, expendable and overlooked, was now a voice that kingdoms listened to. Not because the bond had given her power, but because she'd refused to let it take her power away. And in that refusal, she'd shown the world what was possible. When people stopped accepting the unacceptable, change became inevitable. When they stopped letting fear dictate their choices, freedom became achievable. And when they stopped believing that breaking was the only option, they discovered they were stronger than anyone had ever told them they could be. That was Rowena's legacy. Not the laws she'd helped write or the kingdoms she'd influenced, but the simple revolutionary idea that every person deserved the right to remain themselves, no matter what the world tried to make them. And as she walked through the fortress that had once been her prison, now her home, with her freely chosen partner beside her and a future full of possibility ahead, Rowena smiled, because she'd done what she set out to do. She'd survived without breaking, and in doing so, she'd rewritten the rules for everyone.